Welcome to Justice7x7, an informational podcast brought to you by the San Francisco District Attorney's Victim Services Division. In this podcast, we will explore issues in our community with an emphasis on a trauma-informed approach. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Hannah Hoppe, and we will be going over today's new episode of Justice7x7. This month's podcast will focus on senior pedestrian safety awareness, and we'll be discussing services, outreach efforts, and the prosecution involved. Today we have with us Assistant District Attorney Charlie Bisesto and Victim Witness Advocate Peter Huynh. You'd both like to tell us a little bit about yourselves and kind of what you do in our office.
Hi, my name is Charlie. I've been an assistant DA for about 7.5 years now. I currently work in the gun enforcement unit here at our office, which is a subsection of the crime strategies unit. The gun enforcement unit really just focuses on all firearm-related offenses for the city and county of San Francisco. So anytime somebody is arrested for an offense involving a firearm, the police will bring me that arrest, including any of their investigation, and I will make a charging decision on that case. I then will assign that case to a specific prosecutor in our office for in-court prosecution. Also, as part of my job with that unit, I do work with the police department in terms of training, reviewing warrants, assisting with any investigative decisions, and then I also assist the in-court prosecutor with any trial strategies as well as pretrial offers and the best ways that we can maximize outcomes on those cases. Before my work in the crime strategies unit, I did work as an elder abuse or as the elder abuse prosecutor here at the DA's office, and that was in 2015 to 2016. I was the sole elder abuse prosecutor for our office, and I did very similar work to the work that I do now, in that the police would provide me or would present to me any case with a victim who is 65 years of age or older, and I would make a charging decision on that case. And in that specific assignment, I would also keep those cases for prosecution myself. So if I decided to charge a case, believed that we had enough evidence to prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt, I would ultimately go to court and prosecute that case on my own. And that was, without question, one of my most favorite assignments in my 7+ years in this office, and certainly one of the most important ones, given the nature of those crimes and the victims that were involved, as we will obviously talk about more through the course of this podcast.
My name is Peter. I'm a victim advocate, and I've been with this department for about 5 years. And my caseload is focused on elder abuse and cases involving Chinese-speaking victims. And once we receive a case, we will have 24 hours to make contact with the victims and witnesses and inform them of our services, the status of the charges of the case, and provide any resources that is applicable to them and depending on the needs of the services. And we not only help victims in-house, but we also go out in the community and present to other organizations and to senior centers, inform them about our services, because a lot of time the community do not know about our services until they become a victim of crime, and that information is usually provided by the law enforcement. And to take precautions and preventions to become potential victims, we want to do more outreach actively so victims can be aware of our services and how to reach out and how to contact law enforcement for help when something does happen to them.
Wonderful. So, Peter, you started talking a little bit about some of the services that are offered at the District Attorney's Office with victim services. Can you tell us a little bit about what those services are specifically that are available to seniors?
Yes. So our department has an elder abuse unit that's solely focused on criminal cases related to people with disabilities and seniors who are 65 and over. The unit is specialized in understanding the dynamic and complexity related to seniors. We guide seniors through the criminal justice system. We explain the rights to the victim in terms of Marcy's rights. We assist them in applying for benefits to the Victims Compensation Board. We provide support to, in, and from courts. We assist them in applying for restitution and retrieve their properties from the San Francisco Police Department. And we also provide resources and referrals appropriately to their needs.
So then kind of in both of your areas, what are some challenges that you've found in assisting this population?
One of the biggest challenges, obviously, from a prosecution standpoint, is the idea of court, and the idea that if a case does go to court, that we may need a victim to testify in order to prove our case to either a judge or to a jury. And I think that's especially challenging when you have an elder victim for a couple reasons. One, and probably the most important, is really the idea that a lot of these victims have serious physical limitations and are very hesitant to come to court as a result. And there's also logistical challenges in terms of them traveling from their home to the courtroom. And so as a prosecutor, you are very reliant on the victim advocate as well as your investigator, both to try to provide a certain level of support and comfort for the victim so that they are willing and able to come to the courtroom. And also literally just to provide them the transportation so that they will come to the courtroom, as their participation in that court process is so vital. And that really is the reality with these crimes, right? Is that often criminal defendants fully understand to an extreme just how unlikely it is or how difficult it will be for a victim, an elderly victim, to come to the courtroom. And that is part of the reason why many of these elderly members of our community are targeted by criminal defendants, because they understand and know that these physical limitations will make it much more difficult for them to come to the courtroom and confront the person that has committed a crime against them. So that is especially why it's so important to have prosecutors who are dedicated to this type of work, victim advocates, as Peter mentioned, who are dedicated to this type of work, and investigators who are really committed to seeing these types of crimes followed through all the way through the courtroom to make sure that these victims are properly served.
Yes, and also I want to piggyback on that is a lot of our elderly seniors, they also have hard of hearing, and we have to accommodate in terms of providing hearing aids in court for them to hopefully that they understand fully of the court proceedings and questions being asked to them. And also we have a huge population of monolingual speaking seniors in San Francisco, and that is one of the factors that we have to always take in consideration. And our office were able to request for interpreters to help victims and witnesses who don't speak English and assist them through their primary language so they could testify more comfortably in court and dissent.
If I could just jump on that too, I think Peter brings up a really good point, and this is the value of a victim advocate, especially a victim advocate like Peter, who does speak Cantonese. San Francisco is obviously a very diverse community, and we have a large elderly population who are immigrants, who are first generation, who don't speak English very well. Oftentimes, or many of the population are Chinese. And if you have an advocate who can speak their language, that provides them so much more support and comfort and makes them significantly more willing to engage in the process. So, again, I think as a prosecutor, you really do see a significant value in having an advocate who speaks another language and can really, in that way, provide a higher level of support and comfort for these specific victims.
So I know you two have worked together on quite a few cases in our office and with quite a few victims. Are there any instances where you can really speak to the type of collaboration brought within our office and what that looked like?
Yeah, so about a year ago, I did try a case. It actually went to jury trial. The defendant's name was German Woods, so the case was People versus German Woods. And it was a case that I tried as the elder abuse prosecutor. It really was a significant case, both because of the extent of the crimes as well as the extent of the collaboration between the police department, our office, and victim services in ensuring that justice was served. It was a case where the defendant was alleged to have committed 7 separate robberies of elderly victims in San Francisco. 5 of the robberies occurred in the Chinatown district of the city, and 2 of them occurred in the Japantown district of San Francisco. They occurred over 7 separate days and over about a 3 or 4 month time frame back in 2014. The gentleman who was tried and ultimately convicted, he was sort of prolific in the Chinatown and Japantown areas. He was an outstanding suspect for a while. They couldn't identify him. And because he had committed so many of these crimes, much of the elderly community in these areas of town were terrified. And really what his MO was he would enter into large apartment complexes in these areas of San Francisco in the middle of the day, knowing that elderly victims or elderly individuals, resided in these apartment complexes, knowing that they would ultimately or often during the middle of the day be home alone. He would knock on their doors. When they would open the door, he would force his way in. Once he had identified them as an elderly individual, he would force his way in. He would often use force and push them on the ground, demand money from them, and he wouldn't leave until he had their money. More specific to what we've talked about as well, he targeted these areas of San Francisco because he knew that not only would there be a large population of elderly individuals in these parts of San Francisco, but there would also be, or many of these victims, would also not speak English, or English would not be their first language. And so he knew that it would be very difficult for them to communicate with law enforcement, to even contact law enforcement. And he also knew that they would be less willing to contact law enforcement in the first place. He did this so many times that, as I said, much of the community was really in fear for a significant portion of time. And there was a lot of media coverage and awareness that was really put forward both by our office as well as the police department, telling people to be really mindful of when they would open their doors in the middle of the day. Ultimately, with the work of our office as well as the police department, they were able to identify this individual, and he was arrested in 2014. And that's when both Peter and I got involved. Peter did serve as the victim advocate on the case, and I served ultimately as the prosecutor in 2014, all the way up through the trial in 2017. Really, some of the most important aspects of this case were the work that Peter and I did from the outset. Going to these victims' apartments, making contact with them initially, Peter speaking to them in Cantonese in some circumstances, letting them know of the services that victim services provided, me advising them of the court process and really what it meant, and then ultimately working with any investigator to get them into the courtroom to testify. And ultimately, 5 of the 7 victims did come and testified at the trial in this case. 2 of the victims had passed away prior to the trial, but thankfully we actually had prior testimony that had been recorded of them, which is another kind of valuable aspect of having a prosecutor or prosecutors who deal specifically with elder abuse crimes, because they understand the laws around elder abuse crimes. They understand that there are certain allegations, certain enhancements, and certain evidence code sections that allow us to bring in prior statements, prior testimony from these victims, and really going to court and using these mechanisms to ensure that the best case can be put forward once you get to a jury trial in front of a jury. So, this case really demonstrated, one, a criminal defendant who took advantage of the most vulnerable population of San Francisco, and demonstrated exactly why, having a specific set of prosecutors and victim advocates who deal with these types of crimes is really so important. People who know how to work with this community and how to deal with these cases in the courtroom. And it really also demonstrated the collaboration between victim services and the prosecutors, the courtroom prosecutors, and really how important that work can be. This defendant was ultimately convicted of all 7 of those robberies, and because of his prior criminal history, which did include the exact same conduct for years and years in the exact same areas of San Francisco, he was ultimately sentenced to 327 years to life. So it was a good outcome for such a awful case, and more than anything, though, demonstrated just how significant this type of work really is.
So when this case was assigned to me to work with Charlie, I was very happy to be able to work closely with him because we have a connection with the case, and we work very closely in terms of identify the victims and able to find the language that's most comfortable for them to speak with the advocate, and we're able to go out there and meet with them and explain about the process. And this is a huge step in terms of every cases to have that close connection for the victim to come forward to cooperate and continue to cooperate with prosecution team, is to make that first impression. And a lot of time when victims become a victim, they are not aware of their rights, they're not aware of the laws, they believe they won't be believed in terms of that they are a victim, and they just don't want to go through the process because they are afraid that they will get in trouble for saying something that is wrong. And we're able to make them be more familiar with the law and also with the case, so they all were willing to come forward and help prove this case. And towards the end of the case, when we were able to successfully prosecute this case, we helped the victims and family file for restitution, and the families were able to also come in and speak during sentencing, which is called a victim impact statement. It's giving the family a chance, or the victim a chance, to voice themselves in their own position of how this incident impacted them negatively, not only to them but also to their family members. And that will, and hope to hopefully give them back peace of mind, give them back a whole to their life. And for this case, it's really important, especially in the Chinese community, because this is one of the biggest case that have impacted in the community, because they were afraid if they come forward there would be retaliation. But now, since justice has been served, and he will be serving life in a long time in jail, and the community is definitely have a peace of mind, and a lot of the families and victims were very thankful for Charlie for doing such a successful job, and with the work that we have done to put their life back together.
If I could just add one thing too, and I think Peter really put it well, the importance of victim impact statements cannot be emphasized enough. And that's when you see how important a victim advocate can be, because they speak with victims at the beginning of a case, right? So when a case is charged, telling a victim, this is what we expect, this is what we're trying to do with the case, this is why we're prosecuting it, this is why we need your cooperation. And when you get to the point where you have a successful prosecution and a victim's able to come to the courtroom and really see justice served, and then they talk about it in front of a judge, it's a very powerful thing. It's a powerful thing both for a prosecutor, for the community, and then also for a judge, right? For a judge to hear just how awful a victim feels for the things that have happened to them, for them being victimized. It really provides a judge insight into the life or into the experience of a victim of crime. And so victim advocates are especially important, especially for that exact purpose, because they allow a victim the avenue to come to the courtroom. They allow a victim the avenue to understand the process and why the process is necessary. And then ultimately the victim does and will come forward because of that work of advocates like Peter, and really be able to make an impact on any decision a judge makes when it comes to sentencing, and allows the community of San Francisco to see the criminal justice system from a victim's perspective. So I think that's really a powerful point to bring up here.
So it sounds like you both have kind of touched on a part of this system that I think a lot of people aren't as aware of, kind of after that trial, after there's a guilty or not guilty verdict, kind of what that ends up looking like for the victims and the families, kind of what sentencing and restitution can mean. Can you touch a little bit more on kind of what that process looks like, or what restitution and sentencing can mean for a family?
So restitution it's definitely going to mean a lot for families because it's something that they felt like it's the defendant's responsibility to repay to the family, and restitution is a victim's right, and however it's not guaranteed because it's dependent on the financial ability of the defendant to pay that amount back. But throughout the post process is they will be monitored for the restitution, and a lot of time victims do want restitution is because it's more like it's a property damage or properties that were not recovered. For example, a robbery case, the phone was stolen and the money was stolen. It's not something that the state could compensate back for the victims and family. And when we explain to them through the process of restitution that they may be able to get their money back, then they would be more satisfied in a way that they are. It's
almost like another form of justice.
Right, correct. It's another form of justice, and have them be responsible for the conduct of what they did, and it just bringing them back as a whole, hopefully.
Yeah, I mean, I think restitution is a huge part of the post-conviction aspect of the criminal justice system. You know, also to touch on victim impact statements, I think that's a really powerful aspect too. Once a defendant either pleads guilty or is convicted at a trial, found guilty by a jury or a judge, a victim does have the right to come speak prior to the defendant being sentenced. And this is an important process, both because a judge can hear directly from a victim's mouth, but also because the criminal justice system really up to that point is sort of artificial in a way. So when a victim takes a stand in a case, I'm asking a question, they give me an answer directly to that question. They're not able to really talk about everything that they're feeling. You know, the courtroom has limitations on what they can say and the extent of what they can get into in terms of how they feel. And then a defense attorney has the ability to cross-examine them. And again, you know, a victim is not able to fully explain often how they feel, how much this case and the defendant's conduct has impacted their lives. So the sentencing proceeding, when a victim is able to give an impact statement, is really important because it finally gives the victim the ability to speak freely and tell a judge and tell the criminal defendant and the community how much a case has impacted their lives. And we saw this, I think Peter and I really did see this in the German Woods case. One of the daughters of one of the victims did actually come speak at the sentencing hearing, and her mother had passed away prior to the case actually making it to a jury trial. So it was one of the victims whose prior testimony had to actually be recorded and read into the jury during the jury trial. But she talked about how much of an impact this case made on her mother's life. And she saw it firsthand. And as I said, I think that was a really powerful thing to hear for both the defendant as well as the judge. And certainly in my mind, or in my opinion, made an impact on what the ultimate sentence was. So, you know, everybody thinks that a case ends at the time a guilty verdict is rendered, but, you know, justice does continue beyond that and allows a victim, as Peter mentioned, the ability to pursue justice in other ways after the guilty verdict is rendered.
That's so wonderful. I think a lot of people don't realize that after that conviction stage, they might have the opportunity to kind of share in their own words what an impact the crime made and be able to request a monetary sum from the defendant for costs they've incurred because of the crime.
Absolutely.
So is there anything else either of you would want potential victims or past victims or just elders in our community to know kind of about the system or what their rights are?
Yes, it's very important that if you know someone or yourself has become a victim of crime, either major or minor, please do not be afraid to report the incident to the police. And it is important that the police department keep a record of anything that happened to the potential area or community so they can hopefully send out more police officers to patrol that area. And if English is not your first language or you are monolingual speaking, please also contact the police department, and you just have to tell them what language you speak, and then they will be able to provide an interpreter so you can provide a statement to the police and get help from them.
And really, just to kind of jump on what Peter's saying, it's for victims of crime or witnesses to know there are support systems in place here. You know, I think what Peter and I talked about with the German Woods case is the best example of that, right? So, you know, we have great victim advocates who are willing and able to go out into the community and meet with you, who can speak multiple languages, prosecutors who understand the nuances of elder abuse types of prosecution and what to do in the courtroom to put the best case forward. So, you know, if you are a victim of crime, if you are a witness, just know that there are support systems in place to ultimately provide you the justice that you deserve.
Well, thank you both so much for being here. I really appreciate you taking, time out of your very busy schedules and making sure that we could get a little more information to the public.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
So we just spoke with two members of the San Francisco District Attorney's Office about some of their work in regards to elder abuse cases, what some of the nuances and challenges are that this vulnerable population faces in the criminal justice system, and what our office is doing to try to help ameliorate some of that. Up next, we're going to speak to one of our community members. They're also working on promoting pedestrian safety, and in particular, elder pedestrian safety. If you've seen some of those bright yellow signs with stick figures on bus stops, buses, and on flagpoles around San Francisco, telling you to drive slow and give our seniors a break, we'll give you a little bit of context for our next speaker. I'm joined here with Megan Wier, the Director of Health, Equity, and Sustainability for the Department of Public Health, and co-chair of San Francisco's Vision Zero's task force. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Hannah. It's a real pleasure to be here.
So we have a lot to talk about today, but can you start by giving us an overview of Vision Zero SF?
Absolutely. Vision Zero is our city's policy and commitment to eliminate traffic deaths on our streets as well as reduce severe injuries. And Vision Zero, we focus on all people that are using our roads, and that includes people walking, biking, driving, and as well as riding motorcycles. Vision Zero was adopted in San Francisco in 2014. As you mentioned, I work for the Public Health Department, and we really focus on Vision Zero as a public health crisis on our streets. Until last year, we saw approximately 30 people killed on our streets. Each year, another 500 people seriously injured and requiring hospitalization at our city's hospital. And that means really every 17 hours, somebody is seriously injured enough to be seen by a trauma surgeon in San Francisco. Vision Zero has really fundamentally changed our understanding of traffic deaths as preventable. So our focus is on that traffic deaths are an inevitability, but that we want no more crashes on our city streets. And we're focusing on how we create a transportation system that ensures that mistakes, which are really inevitabilities of human behavior, don't result in severe injury or death. So the past focus with traffic safety was really on perfecting human behavior. Our new focus is really how do we create safe streets that protect people, even the most vulnerable. And part of this is also, creating a safety culture that protects human lives and really working with our city agencies and our community members and our government partners to realize Vision Zero. Also core to Vision Zero is slowing vehicle speeds on our streets and reducing speeding. And that's because we know that with every 1 mile per hour increase in a vehicle's speed, there's an increase in the risk of death when someone's in a crash. So particularly for people walking and seniors, slowing vehicle speeds is really important. I co-chair the mayor's task force with our San Francisco Municipal Transportation Agency. The task force is comprised of over 15 agencies, including the DA's office, our police department, planning department, fire, and public works. And we also work really closely with community stakeholders. We have a Vision Zero coalition that's led by Walk SF with strong support with the Bicycle Coalition that's actually comprised of over 40 community groups that are working with us to ensure that we realize our goal. And I also have to just stress the importance of the great leadership that we have from our city officials, including our mayor, our board of supervisors, and our department heads. And that, of course, includes the important role of the district attorney's office.
It sounds like you're doing a lot of really important work with the city. Can you tell us a little bit more about the Vision Zero Task Force and how the community can get involved?
Absolutely. The task force is really a critical piece of our work. We meet quarterly with the task force, which is comprised of both city agency stakeholders as well as community stakeholders. And we've been really fortunate that since the launch of Vision Zero, we have really strong regular attendance from about 50 stakeholders at our quarterly task force meetings. And it's a great touch point for people. It's open to the public, and it's a good place for people to learn about the engineering projects that we're implementing, local and state policy priorities to save lives, the enforcement that our police department is doing, education initiatives, including those that are being led by the district attorney's office, as well as the data work that we're doing to make sure that the improvements that we're advancing for Vision Zero are really targeted and effective. The task force serves an important function for transparency to the public, for accountability. It's a place for people to ask us questions, to learn more, and to raise important emerging issues. And there's a lot of emerging issues in San Francisco. And then also really a focus for the task force is community engagement and how can we bring more people into Vision Zero, because we know that's really critical for us to realize our goal. I need to highlight that we have a website, vision0sf.org, where people can go on and sign up for our email list and get regular notifications about the task force and other information about Vision Zero and how to get involved.
I know you said there's a lot of work to still be done, but can you speak a little bit to some of the progress that has been made already through Vision Zero?
A key way that we monitor our progress on Vision Zero, of course, is closely monitoring the traffic deaths that occur on our street. And in 2017, we actually had the lowest number of traffic deaths in recorded history of San Francisco, which is over 100 years. And we had 20 deaths on our street last year, which is compared to around 30 deaths in the previous years. Still, we know that one death is too many and that every loss is someone's family member or their friend, their coworker. Each of these lives lost has a profound impact on the community. So while we're encouraged that the number of fatalities is showing that we're making some progress, we have a lot more work to do. And that's why really these partnerships with city agencies and community stakeholders are so critical. We also have been making a lot of progress with respect to the data that we have to inform evidence-based measures to save lives. My team at the Department of Public Health works really closely with our Zuckerberg San Francisco General Hospital's Trauma Center, the police department, the medical examiner's office, our fire departments, emergency medical services, and ambulance companies, and others to make sure that we have the most comprehensive data systems to understand what the problem is and then target effectively solutions to address those issues. So some examples of the work that we've been doing include identifying our city's high injury network. And so that's 13% of San Francisco streets where 75% of our severe and fatal injuries occur. And that's to people walking, biking, driving, and riding motorcycles. We also know that seniors are really disproportionately impacted. For example, they comprised half of our pedestrian fatalities last year. Pedestrians last year were 70% of our traffic deaths. So focusing on what can we do to really protect our seniors and people walking is critical for Vision Zero. Also, through our work, we know that consistently vehicle speeding and failure to yield to people walking are leading factors that contribute to death and severe injury on our streets. So through work led by the SFMTA in partnership with the police department and the Department of Public Health and collaboration with the DA's office and other agencies, there's been some year-long citywide campaigns that are targeting those issues where we've seen evidence of improvements as well. Our SFMTA implemented engineering improvements on over 33 miles of streets last year. Again, really looking at where we're seeing the most critical injury concentrations and targeting improvements there. We also know that our communities of concern, which are communities in San Francisco that are disproportionately comprised of low-income people, communities of color, seniors, people with disabilities, are the most impacted by our high injury network. It is 50% of our high injury network is in these communities. So as we're improving the streets and implementing targeted campaigns, we're also really helping to change conditions in some of these communities that didn't historically receive these types of improvements. I also wanted to mention that seniors have really been a particular focus of Vision Zero, given that they comprise half of our pedestrian fatalities and overall are just more vulnerable to severe and fatal injury. The Department of Public Health has a Safe Streets for Seniors program that's been working to provide multilingual education to seniors and senior service providers about Vision Zero and gathering input to bring back to city agencies. And they've also been funding community-based organizations to provide in-depth education and outreach in neighborhoods. And in response to senior concerns, our SFMTA recently made a policy decision to increase the length of time for pedestrians to cross at traffic signals citywide, which is really exciting policy change for Vision Zero and addresses a really common safety concern that we heard from seniors as well as people with disabilities. I also wanted to mention, again, some of the data and analysis work that we recently completed to look at where seniors and people with disabilities injuries are concentrated. And SFMTA is now using these analyses for a new program that's coming out next year that will be targeting engineering improvements in those same locations. So I think a lot of these initiatives demonstrate both the data-driven, evidence-based approach that Vision Zero is taking, but also really the collaboration between city agencies as well as with community partners to really implement solutions to save lives.
So I know one thing that our office is really excited and really proud about is the Senior Pedestrian Safety Campaign that you listeners can see on San Francisco bus shelters, buses coming out soon, signs throughout the city. So can you speak a little bit to kind of the working relationship and collaboration that Vision Zero's had with the San Francisco District Attorney's Office?
Yeah, absolutely. The District Attorney's Office has been such a critical partner for Vision Zero, and particularly the work with seniors and elders, we know is so important, as seniors at a higher risk of death and as I mentioned earlier, comprise half of our pedestrian fatalities. And this campaign, led by the District Attorney's Office, also really worked closely with Vision Zero on the branding and imaging and with our community partners. And I know everyone is really excited to see it hit the streets. It's encouraging people to drive safely, particularly by obeying the law and yielding to seniors who are crossing the street, and to drive slowly. And that's because, again, we know that slow speeds protect seniors and save lives. We also have been partnering with the DA's office on other initiatives, including Vision Zero's crisis response for victims' families. We know the DA's office knows firsthand the immeasurable loss experienced by families and the community when someone dies. And now when someone is killed on our streets, our DA's office coordinates closely with the police department, the medical examiner, and DPH crisis response to ensure that contact is established as soon as possible with the victims' families, and that they know about the services that the city has available in a really compassionate and timely way. And the District Attorney's Office offers crisis intervention services, resources, and referrals, access to the state's Victims Compensation Program, which can help with funeral services costs and other costs, and also assistance navigating the criminal justice system, which is really a critical resource for families at a really tragic time.
And kind of going with that, do you have any advice for what a survivor can do or a survivor's family can do in regards to pedestrian safety?
Definitely. In addition to our task force and the Vision Zero Coalition, there's a really important organization called the San Francisco Bay Area Families for Safe Streets. It's a regional organization, and it's a volunteer group of people who have either personally survived a severe traffic crash or whose loved ones have been killed or seriously injured in a traffic crash. And these family members work together to prevent crashes from taking the same toll on more families. Our crisis response team that I mentioned was actually a direct response to their advocacy and something that the city was able to respond to based on the experiences that people had had in the past. This group meets monthly and works to advance Vision Zero and also prevent more tragedies like the ones that they've experienced. So if people are survivors or know survivors, I encourage them to look up the Bay Area Families for Safe Streets, and they can really connect victims and bereaved families with peer support and other resources.
Well, Megan, thank you so much for being here with us today and sharing a little bit about the important work you're doing. And I encourage all of our listeners to go check out visionzerosf.org to learn a little bit more about it. We really appreciate you coming in today.
Thank you so much, Hannah. It's been really an honor to be here to talk about Vision Zero and the critical collaboration that we have with the District Attorney's Office. So thank you so much.
Now I've got a request for our Justice 7x7 listeners. Anytime you see one of those big yellow Vision Zero signs, take a picture. Send it to us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, snail mail. We'll take it all. You might even get featured on our social media. Thank you for listening to Justice7x7. A special thank you to all of our guests on today's episode. For more information about this podcast or victim services, please email us at victimservices@sfgov.org or check us out on Instagram at Justice7x7. Watch for our next episode, coming this October. We're going to be talking a little more about domestic violence.